Good morning. I'm always uplifted by Swami Beyondananda. I've been listening to him for years, and I hope he's continuing for years more. This has been an amazing week. I've been enlightened and inspired by so many, not only those who have addressed us from this platform, but also yourselves who are doing such important work in so many different areas of your concern and expertise. I feel greatly privileged to be in your company and to have this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts about the economics of peace. And this is a matter that I've been contemplating for a long time. Ironically, this isn't the first Economics of Peace conference that I've attended. The first one goes back 27 years. It was an Economics of Peace conference that was organized by the Henry George School of San Francisco, and it was held right across the bay here in Alamo, near Walnut Creek. A few years prior to that, I had experienced my own personal epiphany, and from that point on, I set out upon a personal quest of personal re-education and an attempt to discover the root causes of the world's recurrent problems, including the causes of war. Others this week have already described the dimensions of our current predicament. And while I may not be able to match their level of eloquence, I'd like to add a few bits of information that I think will round out the picture, offer us some hope, and point the way toward effective action. Earlier speakers have offered insights that fit into three levels of action in which change is needed. These are the personal or individual, the interpersonal or cultural, and the structural, those institutions and political, religious, economic, and social structures that determine our behavior. This immortal quote from Pogo has become almost a cliche, but we have yet to internalize it and to take it to heart. The old world order, the world that we're living in today and is rapidly passing away, is based on a set of beliefs, a belief in separation, that we are individuals and that we are in competition within a scarce global economy. It's based on a belief in command and control, elite rule, and the immutability of human nature. And this set of beliefs favors large-scale hierarchical organizations and centralized control as a way of imposing order and mitigating risks. Now, we've been hearing for some time from our political leaders about a new world order, but it's evident that the new world order that they have in mind is just an extension of the old world order. It's based on the same values and mindset, and it will further centralize power and consolidate wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And it's doing this, and has been doing it for a long time, by weakening national governments and bringing them under the control of global financial and industrial corporations that are in the hands of a political elite. And we are very rapidly reaching the climax of this process, where we will have a global totalitarian superstate. Now, Ellen Brown the other day showed you this quote from Carroll Quigley. Now, Carroll Quigley was not some obscure academic conspiracy nut. He was, in fact, Bill Clinton's mentor. He was a noted historian at Georgetown University and consultant to a number of different government agencies and institutions. And he wrote this book called Tragedy and Hope, where he outlined basically the dimensions of modern history and this relentless move toward centralized control and totalitarian government. He didn't think it was necessarily a bad thing. I have a different opinion on that. But he said the powers of financial capitalism had a far-ranging plan, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. Their secret is that they have annexed from governments, monarchies, and republics the power to create the world's money. Well, I have in mind a different kind of world order, and I think it's a world order that you would agree with. It's based on a belief in the oneness of all life, human unity, abundant sufficiency, there's enough for everybody in this world, nonviolence, sharing, and cooperation, collective intelligence and community self-government, and the potential for human improvement. This mindset favors diverse, decentralized, small-scale systems and communities that enable freedom and self-expression. I have this notion that society worldwide is going through a metamorphic process, similar to the transition from the caterpillar to the butterfly. We're all somewhat familiar with that process. The behavior of the caterpillar is very destructive. You can see infestations of caterpillars and grubs of different kinds, and they can eat and eat a prodigious amount in a very short period of time. And their function is to accumulate nutrients and to grow. So they eat and grow and grow. And it looks like it's a very destructive process. And indeed it is. If it goes on without stopping, it does become very destructive. So we've been in a civilization where we have experienced superfluous accumulation of all kinds of things, including money. We've experienced violent conflict over resources, wasteful consumption, and what we're doing now is moving toward a sustainable, convivial society. Now, in terms of economics, the old caterpillar economy, as I describe it, promoted growth of economic output, quantitative measures of value and well-being, capital accumulation, resource consumption, labor productivity, that means getting more value, more stuff out of less labor inputs because labor is a cost of production to corporate producers, and growing disparities of wealth and power. This is what has given us the consumer society. The new butterfly economy, on the other hand, promotes steady-state economic output, qualitative measures of value and well-being, restoration of all aspects of the commons, resource productivity instead of labor productivity, that is getting more value out of less stuff, less material input. It emphasizes sharing and regeneration, not only of our environment, but also of our communities. And it promotes more equitable distribution of wealth and power. This is what I call the convivial society, to borrow a word from Ivan Illich. So in my research, I concluded early on that money is the key. It's sort of the elephant in the living room that nobody wants to talk about, nobody is actually seeing. But you know, the reason why money is so important is because every economic transaction involves money. Money is sort of the Khyber Pass through which everything has to go. And whoever controls the pass controls everything else. And Adam Smith said, when an economy becomes so developed and labor is so specialized that it is very little of our material needs that we can provide for ourselves. We get what we need by transacting trades with others. So the fact is that money, over a long period of time, has been politicized and monopolized and made an instrument of power. It's not only those who have the money, it's those who control the actual process of creating money. And those who control money control everything else. Now, here are a few quotes. You can find a lot more on the web. How many of you have seen the video Money as Debt? If you go to the Money as Debt website, you can see that video. There's a second part of it that's been put out recently by Paul Grignon, the producer of that film, and it's excellent in describing this money system and how it works. He also has a list of dozens of quotes. Here are just a few of them. President James Garfield said, "Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is the absolute master of all industry and commerce." Garfield was president for a few months and then was assassinated. He had been, when he was in Congress, he had been chairman of the House Banking Committee. So he knew what he was talking about. And he was an ardent opponent of the practice of usury, especially usury built into a monetary system. Reginald McKenna was the former president of the Midland Bank in England, and he said, "Those who create and issue money and credit direct the policies of government and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people." And this quote from Thomas Jefferson, which Ellen referred to earlier. So in order to get a grasp on the economics of peace, we first have to understand the economics of war. One of my primary mentors, one of the people from whom I learned the most about money and what it is E.C. Riegel, and I highly recommend the books that he wrote. He died in 1954, but his works have been preserved and are available on the web. You can access them through my website and my blog. He said, "The political money system starves productive enterprise, but finances lavishly the destructive activities of war." And we can see how obvious that is, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And he said, "As long as our governments are vast counterfeiting machines, Mars can laugh at peace projects." And so it has been up until now. The way this came about is through the central banking system, which has spread to every country around the world. The Bank of England was the prototype central bank. This was started in 1694. At that time, William III ascended the throne in England, and he was fighting a war against France. Wars, of course, are very expensive propositions. It takes a lot of resources to fight a war. Well, William Patterson and some of his cohorts came to the king and said, "We will give you the money you need to fight war if you will give us a privilege." And the privilege was this, that the Bank of England would be allowed to have a monopoly on banknote issue, and they could issue banknotes by lending them into circulation at interest. In return, the king was guaranteed that the bank would provide sufficient money in order for the war to be continued. And so it has been ever since and has spread to every country around the world. Every country has a central bank. Some are nominally owned by the government. Others are privately owned, like our Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private corporation. So we have this unholy alliance between politics and finance in which the banking cartel enjoys special privilege, which is to lend money at interest and to have a monopoly on credit, and the government in return gets to spend as much as it wants without regard to limited tax revenues and without having to directly tax the people. People hate taxes, and it's very hard to push that to any great extent. So the mother of all monopolies is the money power. So the dysfunctions that are inherent within this conventional money and banking system, we have, first of all, a growth imperative. The money system, based on compound interest, causes debt to grow simply with the passage of time. If a bank lends money at interest, money that it creates over time, that debt will grow. Now, they created the principal for the loan at the beginning, but they didn't create enough to pay the interest. So if the original borrowers are going to pay their interest, they're going to have to capture enough money from the market in order to do that. So this means that banks will have to make additional loans to other people in order to enable the system to continue. So money is kept artificially scarce for the private productive sector while it's lavished on the public sector to fight wars and promote empire. Money is misallocated in that way. It's expensive because of the interest burden that comes in at every point in the production process. And thus it concentrates power and wealth in the hands of a few unelected people who are unresponsive to the needs or wishes of the people. So what we have to understand is that the substance of modern money is credit. We have made a big transition over time in the substance of money. Originally, money was commodities. Gold and silver became the favored commodities because they were high value for low mass, and they could easily be promoted to serve as a medium of exchange. They could be easily transported and divided into smaller units. So money now has gone through a transition from commodity money to symbolic money, which was banknotes redeemable for gold or silver, to credit money. And this money typically takes the form of bank deposits that are created when banks make loans, and to some extent currency notes that are emitted by the central bank. Now we trust these forms of money because that's what we've been given, that's what we've been taught, and that's what we're accustomed to using. And we seldom stop to think, what other methods of exchange might we use? What other payment media might be used? But just to reinforce this idea of bank credit created money, here's the way it works. You go to the bank and you ask for a mortgage. They take your note, which is an asset to the bank, and they create a liability on their books, which is a credit to your account. So basically we have this debt money system where banks make loans and they create money on the basis of those loans. It's as simple as that. And I think somebody else quoted John Kenneth Galbraith earlier. He said, "The process by which money is created is so simple that the mind is repelled." And I've told people this over and over again through the years, and I see their eyes glaze over, and it's not that they can't understand it, they just can't believe it. But that's the way it is. So with this exponential function, the compound interest that's built into the monetary system, we have this famous hockey stick curve that Al Gore made famous in his movie An Inconvenient Truth. And if you compare linear growth with exponential growth, you see how exponential is growing at an accelerating rate. And if you look at the growth of a debt at compound interest, I've just chosen two examples, 6% and 10% interest. And you leave it long enough to grow over time, the figures become astronomical. At 6%, a single dollar debt at 6% compound interest will grow to $115,000. That's how much you will owe in 200 years' time if you don't make any payments. Now, if you raise that to 10%, that's only a 4% difference. Seems like a small amount, but you see the numbers really get truly astronomical. A single dollar in debt will grow in 200 years' time to be almost $190 million. Now, these numbers are hard to believe, but that's the way it is. You can figure it out on a financial calculator yourself. And here are those figures graphed so that you can see graphically how the numbers grow over time. Now, this isn't simply theoretical. We can see this actually playing out in reality. This chart shows the actual growth of debt in the United States for all sectors just since 1965. You know, this is a little over 40 years. And we're seeing how the debt has grown, not only in absolute terms, but also in terms of our total economic production. The gross domestic product, or GDP, is the measure that economists use to measure total economic activity and output. In 1965, total debt as a percentage of GDP was about 1.5 times. Today, it's grown to about 3.5 times. And George Soros, the well-known speculator and currency trader, in his latest book is saying that within a very short number of years, that's going to grow to 5 times GDP. And he's also saying that this is the end of an era. It's not business as usual. This economy is not going to get back to normal. There is no more normal to get back to. Now, simply looking at the U.S. government portion of this debt, this chart only goes to 2007. At the time, total government debt was $9 trillion. Now, since 2007, 2 years' time, total government debt has grown to about $11.7 trillion. That's almost a 30% increase in 2 years. And the government has just released figures saying that the budget deficit for this fiscal year is going to be $1.4 trillion, and that over the next 10 years we're going to see total deficits of $9 trillion. And those figures are always understated. We know it's going to be much worse than that if the game goes on that long. And if you include government guarantees, what the government owes amounts to $47 trillion. I just heard that one this morning on CNBC. So what's happening here? We're seeing a systemic failure of money in banking. The political money system is shaking itself apart. We have these recurrent cycles of bubble and bust. And the most recent bubble, of course, was the real estate bubble. The banks were taking on all comers. They were allowing anybody and everybody to borrow money on the basis of real estate. So they were giving mortgages willy-nilly to people who they knew could not afford to pay. And as they made money readily available for real estate purchases, that put more buyers into the market and bid up the prices of real estate. So in many places, real estate prices tripled in a matter of 2 or 3 years. Well, of course, you always reach the point where the debt is too much to bear. And when those people were starting to default on their loans, then the banks started foreclosing, and we had the collapse of the real estate bubble. And now prices of real estate are still on the decline. So we have the Humpty Dumpty syndrome here. All the king's horses and all the king's men will not put this system back together again. The essential elements of the political money system, then, are these. We have a credit monopoly controlled by a banking cartel, and the banking cartel is headed by the central bank. They sort of regulate the money-creating power of each of the member banks, and the currency of that central bank is given privileged status through laws that are called legal tender. If you look at a Federal Reserve note and you read what it says on the front, it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So the government is saying you must accept Federal Reserve notes as payment for any debt that is owed. Otherwise, you have no recourse to the courts. So credit money is lent into circulation at interest. This requires the endless expansion of debt by lending either to the private sector or the public sector. Now, we've seen this very graphically just in the last couple years. I talk about the credit commons. Money is nothing but credit. And whose credit is it that supports all money? It's yours and mine. It's our willingness to accept these credit instruments that gives it value. Otherwise, it would have no value at all. So, looking at this chart, the way we can access the credit commons today, we can only access the credit commons through banks by taking loans from the banks. Now, what the banks did was they loaded up the private sector with debt. You know, earlier I said that the system requires that debt be continually expanded. And they loaded up the private sector with debt based on real estate transactions. And when the private sector was no longer able to service that debt, what happened? The government took it over. The government bought these toxic loans, this toxic debt, and now we've shifted it over to the public sector. So that means that you and I now are responsible for writing off all that bad debt. So the war economy depends on these parasitic drains: inflation, interest, and taxes. The interest, or the usury that's built into the system, is institutionalized, and it forces economic growth. It concentrates power and wealth in fewer hands and creates class conflict. Inflation is called a hidden tax because it's a tax that is not imposed directly, but we experience it through increasing prices. As this legalized counterfeit money goes into circulation, more and more of it goes into circulation, prices of everything go up. The counterfeiter has no intention of reciprocating. The counterfeiter only takes, doesn't give real value. And we have a taxation system that is centralized, unfair, and excessive. You know, the founding fathers did not intend for the federal government to have direct taxing power. And that's written into the Constitution, but it's been ignored. So the purpose of a central bank, if you listen to the economists, are to keep unemployment low and to keep inflation low. But in fact, the purpose of a central bank is to enable inflation, to enable profligate spending by national governments, and to enable the monopolization of credit so that usury can be charged for it. Salmon P. Chase was Abraham Lincoln's Treasury Secretary. When Lincoln was fighting the Civil War, again, there was a big need for resources. And he went to the bankers to get financing to fight the war. The bankers were willing to finance the war, but at outrageous rates of interest, 30% or more. So Lincoln went to some of his advisors, and they told him, well, you can issue notes directly from the Treasury and use those to pay for the things that you need to fight the war. These were the greenback currency that is written about in the history books. Salmon P. Chase presided over this issuance of greenbacks. The initial issuance of greenbacks did carry interest. I think there was a small interest that was paid when people accepted the greenbacks, but later issues did not bear an interest. They did not pay interest. Later on, Salmon P. Chase became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And when this issue of greenback currency came before the court, he was in the dissenting minority, saying that legal tender is only valuable for the purpose of dishonesty. It enables governments to push on the people a debased currency. And that's why I don't favor the greenback solution. He said every honest purpose is answered as well or better without it. So what we have today is a situation where bank credit has become unreliable and uncertain. The private sector, especially the small and medium-sized businesses, are being starved for credit. So we're having companies go bankrupt, laying off workers, and causing general what we call the Great Recession. Well, what is a Great Recession but a depression? So this system favors big banks, big corporations, and big government. How do we get toward an economics of peace? We need to transmute this growth imperative. That's the most important thing. And we have to create a sustainability imperative. And the way we do that is by developing a new system of exchange and finance. We need to align private interests with peace and the common good. We need to structure our institutions to assure harmony and restrain sociopathic inclinations. You know, it seems like it's the most sociopathic that climb to the top of the hierarchy. The way forward is to reclaim the credit commons. We need to shift power to the local communities. And we do this by investing in the butterfly and not the caterpillar. We reclaim the credit commons by reorganizing the exchange function. What we have to do is monetize the local value added. Now, this is a fancy way of saying we need to create our own currencies, our own exchange credit mechanisms by taking the local value added by our businesses and enterprises and putting that in a form that can be used as a medium of exchange. At the same time, we should not forget that we already have a very powerful ballot, which is the money that we have at our disposal, the conventional money. So we have to first spend locally, save locally, and invest locally. But that will only take us so far. We have to do the first thing as well. I use the analogy of the small boat harbor. It's said that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's the justification for trickle-down economics. Globalization, the way it has been foisted off on us up to now, has actually been destructive to local economies and to small and medium-sized businesses. It's been as if somebody said, we should not have seawalls anymore. So they go around the world and they tear down all the seawalls that protect the small boat harbors. So this process of globalization has smashed all but the biggest companies. What we need to do is to protect the seawalls, to rebuild the seawalls, and to have viable community economies. You know, the age-old debate in economics is between free trade and protectionism. Well, we need both free trade and protectionism, and we need to get the power out of the hands of large corporations. So, community empowerment through the liberation of exchange and finance. This is my prescription. We need to insulate but not isolate our local economies. There will always be trade with the outside. We can reduce exploitation, enhance economic vitality, enable self-determination, and optimize the community's standard of living and quality of life. We reclaim the credit commons by, first of all, becoming less dependent on political currencies as a means of payment, and later on, become independent of national currencies as a measure of value. See, the dollar has come to have two meanings. It's both a payment medium and it's also a way of measuring value. We have to crack both of those. So we have the right to decide who we will trust and what payment media we will accept. It's our credit and we can allocate it as we wish. And we have the right to choose the value units that we wish. So we have these two synergistic approaches to liberating exchange. What I talk about is mutual credit clearing and also complementary private currencies. We have, over the last 30 years, a substantial movement, and there are two sectors to this movement. We have the grassroots community currency movement, which which consists of local currencies, you've heard of many of them, and mutual credit systems like LETs. These have emerged from the grassroots and social action groups. But we also have the commercial sector that's doing this on a for-profit basis. These are the commercial trade exchanges, such as Richard Logie talks about, and we've had several representatives of that sector here this week. David Wallach, Annette Riggs. Well, when we consider private currencies and local value added, there are a number of different entities that are able to issue currencies. Municipal governments can issue a currency on the basis of their tax revenues and fees that they charge for services. Local businesses can issue their own currency on the basis of their capacity to provide goods or services. And we can associate all those legal entities together into cooperative associations to jointly issue local currencies that can supplement the money supply. A good example of this is the Vir model, which has been spoken of this week as well. The Vir was a cooperative business circle organized in 1934 by the small and medium-sized businesses in Switzerland. The problem in Switzerland, as elsewhere during the Great Depression, was an insufficient supply of money in circulation to the productive sector. So they got together and they figured out that they can do direct credit clearing amongst themselves so that basically their sales pay for their purchases and they can transact business without the use of money. So in 2005, Sergio Lube and I visited Basel and went to the Vir Bank, and this is where that picture was taken. But there are now 60,000 small and medium-sized business members in the Vir credit clearing circle, and they're clearing about $1.33 billion worth of trades every year. And this is the way it works. If you take this oval as representing our circle of associated members, and the smiley faces represent the members, and we have two different kinds of members. We have issuing members and non-issuing members. Issuing members are the ones that can have an overdraft. They can have a negative balance. They can buy before they sell. The non-issuing members must sell before they can buy. So we allocate credit on the basis of a member's ability to provide valuable goods and services to the other members. Once we have that going smoothly, then we can collectively issue a currency on the basis of the members' collective credit by doing business with outsiders. The tan smiley faces represent people who are non-members of the association but still do business within the community. So we can issue a currency, maybe in the form of a paper note or a smart card balance or a ledger balance, and when a member buys something from someone outside the association, then that collective credit of the members can circulate throughout the community as a supplemental medium of exchange. And of course, it has to eventually come back inside the association to be redeemed in goods and services. So the advantages of these approaches are that we have an exchange medium that's abundant, community-controlled, democratically allocated, interest-free, self-adjusting, stable, and sustainable. Everything that the conventional money is not. I just want to touch on the experience of the past several years. The currencies, the community currencies that have emerged from the grassroots level have not been terribly successful. There's a typical pattern that they emerge with a lot of enthusiasm and there's some circulation to begin with, and then they gradually fade away. And I go over this in my book, so I won't belabor this point, but there are a number of reasons why these systems stagnate or fail. First of all is the failure of reciprocity. That's fundamental. The purpose of a currency is to promote reciprocal exchange. Put in as much as you take out from the economy. And there are a number of management issues that are also coming into play in this. And finally, there's the scale and scope of operation. You have to reach a certain critical mass. You know, if you want to put a satellite into orbit around the Earth, you have to have a rocket that's sufficiently powerful to reach what they call escape velocity, to overcome the gravitational force of the Earth and maintain a stable orbit around the Earth. It's the same with a local currency or community exchange system. You have to reach critical mass, a sufficient number of participants with a wide enough range of goods and services to offer so that it can be sustained and become a significant factor in the local economy. Many currencies are being sold for cash, and this is sort of reinventing the gift certificate. That has some advantages in getting people used to the idea that there are other possibilities besides conventional political money that can be used as a medium of exchange. But the real empowerment comes from monetizing the local value added, which means spending the currency into circulation, not selling it into circulation. I'm promoting a 5-stage community economic development project which is based on local credit clearing association. And this is also outlined in the book. I won't belabor it because we're running out of time. Basically, we're trying to do this in the south of India. I've been working with some people in the area around Auroville in Tamil Nadu, near the city of Pondicherry. And we have underway a project to develop the entire local bioregional economy based first on import substitution, what Jane Jacobs talks about as the foundation for the development of city economies, and then by providing an alternative means of payment through direct credit clearing between buyers and sellers. The benefits that derive from community currencies and exchange credits. First of all, they provide an independent means of payment, reducing dependence upon borrowing from banks, and thus reducing the risk of insolvency and the cost of interest. They can circulate throughout the local area, supplementing the supply of scarce official money and bank credit. They enable local businesses to better compete with large corporate chains, and they enable more complete use of the available labor and production capacity. This is the answer to the unemployment problem. So, dear friends, the challenge before us is not to win any military battle. There's no need to fight anybody. We don't need to take down the banking system. We don't need to win any elections or force any new legislation through Congress. Our task is to take responsibility for ourselves and our communities, to find common ground with our friends and neighbors and even our adversaries, and to turn our efforts towards serving the common good. We need only exercise the power that is already ours, what E.C. Riegel called our money power, which is simply our power to give each other credit. So like Gandhi with his spinning wheel, we can tell our would-be masters, we will not be slaves to your monopoly. We do not need your money. We will spin our own from the fibers of trust and cooperation that we grow together in our own communities and use it for the benefit of all. Thank you.